play devil's advocate, Rapelang, if we think about Apple, the world's biggest company by market cap, notorious for closed innovation. So how do you sell this when a company is looking at different strategies to increase revenues and to become more competitive when you have that particular example standing on the other end of the spectrum?
Sure. I think, Apple is one example, but similarly, there's many other examples where we're seeing even sort of the mobile operators where the traditional revenue in GSM has declined. And for them, for example, they need to innovate to find new products and services to provide on data. And not all of those innovations are going to come from inside. So you asked if sort of the pain points are felt on the balance sheet. And I think we're starting to see that already. So in certain markets, it won't all sort of pan out like Apple. And I think in those kind of instances, we'll definitely see a need for large corporations to find those partnerships with smaller startup companies where ideas can be incubated and the larger company or corporate can help take that idea to scale. I think that's really the big gap that we're still finding in South Africa and many other African markets, where we've got many small and isolated innovations, but very few that have come to significant scale. And that's really what we need to do as part of the open innovation agenda to take it further.
Well, there is a point I want to make, and I think I'm going to be a bit controversial because I don't actually believe that Apple doesn't use open innovation. Actually, they do. If you look at all of the, most of the platforms that they've put in place, yes, they tend to want to own the platform and allow other people access into the platform on rules they have defined. So it's not like open for all. So kind of like, it's not the same as when we're talking about open source type technologies that they allow people to do. They control the ecosystem. But if you look at how they developed, for example, the first touch screen, they didn't actually invent the touch screen, right? If you look at how they developed the Apple Watch, they didn't actually invent a lot of the technologies that they put inside the Apple Watch. They went out to people that are already in that space and they talk to them about what is it that they're needing to do. And then if you look at how they're working on the iTunes platform, for example, they created the platform, and a lot of the apps that we are talking about in there are apps that are written by people in the ecosystem. So effectively, they are creating a platform and they're allowing people to orchestrate multiple things on a predefined platform with a very predefined business model, which is slightly different from what you're looking at if you look at Google and the other guys, how they are doing in terms of their business model.
I think you raise an important point. Well, I have seen your hand, but perhaps, William, while you're on that, if we take a look at open innovation, there's also other issues that underpin the ecosystem, intellectual property issues and licensing that comes into play. Where are the best case examples in terms of where these issues have been bedded down and it's worked for the betterment of the ecosystem broadly?
Well, we talk large enterprises today that are using open innovation very, very successfully in the ecosystem. You can talk large, product developers today in the healthcare system. The issue of IP is, I think, bedded down now. There are models that people put in play to safeguard the aspects of IP in terms of who really eventually owns the IP. There are different models. Sometimes you pay for the IP, so somebody innovates, brings about the innovation, and you pay them for doing that. So you could crowdsource the innovation. And in that case, the people understand very clearly that you've paid money for them to innovate. If you're thinking about how Peter Diamandis with his SpaceX or with his PrizeX organization go about doing it, is that they have the biggest and largest problems in the world, and they're asking everyone else in the world to innovate around how to solve that problem. But it's clear who is going to own the IP.
So we're moving from crowdsourcing to crowd solving, and I'm going to come back to how open innovation can then be the bedrock of crowd solving. Well, I saw your hand when we were talking about Apple, so let's bring that comment in.
No, I just wanted to build on what was already being said. I think the greatest success, among other things, the greatest success of Apple come from the Apple Store. And if you look at the Apple Store, all the apps that are being developed in the Apple Store are developed outside of Apple. So basically, what you have in that sense is what I consider as being a market maker. So you need a market maker to push for the ecosystem. And that market maker is creating the conditions for smaller players, which individually would be very difficult for them to actually have access to that market. And that's what you see more and more. And the fintech space is one approach that is being taken by the banks at this point.
So the ecosystem is made up of market players or market makers as well as startups and smaller players. I want to come to that particular relationship in particular, because one would think that on the one hand with startups you have this really dynamic, agile, fast-moving culture against maybe a much slower, more inflexible, bigger corporate. How do you bring the two together, and do we again have examples of how a big player in the market has really found a good cultural fit with this agile and dynamic market surrounding it?
I don't know that they're necessarily good examples of how we merge it, and I don't think that merging it is necessarily the right answer. I think it's best to look at a process where the startup can remain independent and remain innovative, yet have access to the distribution and market channels of their market-making partner. Certainly in Africa, one example that I'm aware of is in the healthcare space. A colleague of mine is running a company called M-Pharma, for example, and they have developed an amazing platform to help with the distribution of medicines inside countries where you don't really know where medicine goes once the pharmaceutical company has dropped it. And they've actually had to partner with the pharmaceutical companies to actually be able to deploy those products to market. And without that partnership, they wouldn't get to scale. But the company remains independent and has sort of either client or supplier partnerships with the other entities to help them get to scale. And I think where companies are open to that, it becomes very, very compelling. And those are very good examples.